Okay, so this is part 2, and we're going to focus on graphing in this part. So, if you haven't already, turn your calculator on, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to y equals. Now, all these buttons up here in gray are the ones we're going to predominantly use to write our graphs. So first things first, y equals. This button allows us to type in whatever line we want, and then that will later show up on our graph. So let's just make up a line really quickly. A super simple, let's do this, something like this. Okay, so what we need to do in order to see this is we can go to graph. Alright, now we can see our line has been graphed for us. If your calculator is in the current setting that I am, I currently have my window at much larger than is standard. So let's say I want to make it back to standard so we can see a clearer view of our line. So in order to go back to standard viewing without having to change all of these numbers, this is the window, by the way, this is how much I'm able to see. So let's go to zoom, and then we can see all of these different options to give us a different view of our graph. So I'm going to go to zoom 6 or Z standard, and that's going to take us back to our regular 10 by 10 view. So let's press that. Alright, now we can see a clearer, more readable version of our graph, and we can see that it crosses over here on the x-axis. That's a 0. So how about the question asks us to find the zeros? So how we do all of those extra calculations is by pressing second and then pressing trace. Now we're in calculate. This is where you can find a lot of super helpful things for calculating on your graph. So for our question, we want to find the 0. So let's go to number 2. Option 2 is 0. So press enter. And now you can see that we have a cursor on our graph. It's asking us to go left bound. So what we need to do is we need to go to the left of our 0, which is in this case right about here. We're just going to get as close as we can and press enter. And then you can see a little arrow popped up. It's kind of hard to see for this example, but a little arrow is right there. And then if we go to the right of our 0, just as close as we can, and press enter, we can see that those two little arrows are pointing to each other. That's how we know we did it correctly, if the two arrowheads are pointing to each other. So let's press enter again when it asks us guess. And now we can see that it found our 0, it found our 0 for us, and we didn't have to do any actual writing. So, another important thing that you could do is you could just trace. So let's say that we have something interesting going on somewhere on our graph. If we press trace, we can move our cursor and we can just see what's happening here. We can see right here at -3, x is 0. So that might be helpful to know for one of the questions. Alright, so we just have a linear graph right here. Let's move on to a parabola. So if we have an equation that looks something like this, we're going to get a parabola on our graph. So let's go back to zoom 6. Oh, we can see that it goes off the graph a little bit. It's too high for us to see. So right now, in our standard viewing, it's not allowing us to see our graph properly. So if we go to window, and then we can change what we need to see. We can either go to window and make these numbers larger in order for us to properly view our graph, or we could go to zoom and we could press something like zoom out or zoom in, or even zoom box too. So in this case, we want to zoom out so we can see more. All right, now we can see kind of skinny, but we can see that our parabola is opening up. We can learn a lot about it from the graph. So that's just how you can change the view that you get to see. So let's go back to y equals, and let's write something a little different. So let's say we have this. Let's do something like that. Okay, so this is going to give us a parabola again, so let's graph. All right, now let's say we want to know where the zeros are on this graph. So if we press zoom 6 again, we'll be back here. So we could go back to calc, find our zeros, and it'll be nice and easy. You can also arrow over, see that we can give these points here too. Sometimes the test will ask you to find the minimum and maximum. So another thing that we can do under calc with second trace is find the minimum. So option 3 says minimum, press enter. We're going to go to the left of the minimum. We're going to arrow over to the right. You can see that our arrows are pointing to each other, so we know we did it correct. And then press enter for guess. You can see right here our minimum, and it gives us these nice points right here. So let's say we want to know the maximum, just the opposite. So just make that negative. All right, now we have a maximum. Second, calc, arrow down to maximum. Same thing, just go to the left as close as you can to the maximum. Arrows are pointing to each other. We know we did it right. Press guess, and now we have our maximum. Okay, so let's talk about another thing we can do in graph. We can find the intersect. So let's make another linear graph. Let's do something like that. And then, as you can see, I just arrowed down in order to get into y2. y1 is going to be our first line, and then y2 is going to be our second line. So I just wrote something in here, and now I'm going to write another one in here. Let's make that a little bit more simple. Okay. Graph. That's our first line, and that's our second line. And you can see that they cross right about here. If we want to find an exact intersection, let's go to calc again. Second trace. Arrow down. 5 is intersect. Now, this is going to be very similar to the right bound and left bound. You can see that my cursor is moving up and down on our first line. So we're just going to arrow over and get as close as we can to the intersection and press enter. All right, now you can see that my cursor is jumped over to the second line. We're going to get as close as we can. All right. Guess, just press enter. Now we have a super nice answer for our intersection. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is equations where it asks you to put some parameters on your graphs. So I'm just gonna go ahead and write something, but this time I'm gonna use parentheses. So the parentheses buttons are right above the 8 and 9, parenthesis 4 x minus 5. All right, close parenthesis, and then I'm gonna write an open parenthesis too. So in order to get our inequality signs, we can put an X, and then we're gonna press second and math. Now we're in the test, and we can see that we have all these different inequality options. So we can just do, we can do this one for example. Okay, and then let's say we want to do 4 or maybe 6. Okay, graph. All right, we can see that in our current view, we can't see much. So let's go to zoom, make it a little bigger for ourselves. We can do, go to window, make it a little bigger for ourselves, and we can do -50 in the in the x min. So now our x minimum is going to be showing us a bit more. We can do +50 in the y max. In the y min, we can do -50 as well, +50, and then see if that gives us a little bit better review. All right, now you can see that I told my graph to cut off everything from that 6 right here. So now we're only given that much of the graph. This can be helpful for some parametric functions or any type of questions that you get with inequalities. One last thing I want to mention, let's second quit to get out of graphing, is notice the sine, cosine, and tangent. Those will be helpful for you. But other than that, there's still a lot of things about the graphing calculator that you can explore and check out yourselves. But for our test purposes, I think that will be a good explanation on some things that will help you out. So thank you for watching.